Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the sweat-slicked world of ancient Egyptian bakers. Yes, really. You're not drifting off to pyramids or golden tombs tonight. Instead, you're waking up on a scratchy mat, your skin coated in flour dust, and the scent of scorched grain lingering in your nose. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you are. I love seeing who's tuning in from where. The fire beside you crackles low in its clay belly, still warm from the midnight bake. Your joints ache, your eyes burn. And sunrise? It's not a beginning. It's just another checkpoint in the marathon of making bread for the living and the dead. But here inside, you're already late. The dough from last night is waiting, covered with damp linen to keep it from drying out in the night air. You pull your tunic tighter, dunk your hands in a cracked water jar, and start kneading, palms slapping and folding the sticky mass like it personally insulted your family. It's gritty, uneven, full of tiny rock shards from the grinding stones. Not the round, fluffy kind you might dream of. Maybe one of the women from the house next door. What's clear is that likely someone with a lot of rings on their fingers keeps count. You stoke it with kindling from a dwindling pile and fan the base. Just for a minute. It's not sleep exactly, more like a tiny pause in the madness. A micro snooze in a world where naps are stolen, not granted. You sleep beside the oven because you have to. Because there's no line between your body's rest and your labor anymore. You are the bakery. Flames roar just for a moment. The dome shape holds heat well, which is both a blessing and a curse. Once hot, it stays hot. But it also means standing next to it is like hugging a volcano. You slide the first loaves in, using a long soot-blackened paddle. The edges puff slightly. The smell is not bad, earthy, familiar. A little sharp, maybe, from overproofing. You tell yourself it doesn't matter. The gods won't mind. They eat smoke. You owe loaves. And the pharaoh doesn't like being shorted. You can't see her, but you know the cough. That dry, harsh sound that means she's been breathing too much smoke. The bakery is as much a respiratory hazard as it is a workplace. There's no chimney, after all, just a hole in the ceiling that sometimes works. You've probably already taken a few years off your life just by showing up to work every day. But hey, if the gods meant for you to be rich, you'd have been born into a scribe's family. These are squat, almost triangular, and a little sunken in the middle. Some are flat, padded thin, and thrown straight onto the oven walls. Others get molded into little cones or discs. If you're working for a temple or tomb project, there are molds to follow bread in the shape of birds, leaves, even cows. People believe these shapes carried meaning into the afterlife. You just think they burn too easily. Your hands are already raw from yesterday, and your elbows have this low, pulsing ache you've learned to ignore. At some point today, you'll wipe sweat from your brow and feel the sting of a new cut, opened silently by a bit of sand embedded in your dough. Bakers' hands are almost always bleeding somewhere. But don't worry, you'll toughen up. Or you won't. Either way, the bread gets made. You've slept next to it because firewood is precious, and you can't afford for the coals to go out. Besides, it's the only warmth in your tiny bakery hut where nights get surprisingly chilly despite the blazing days. The scent of ash, yeast, and old smoke has soaked into your hair. Your mattress is a reed mat, your pillow a sack of yesterday's flour. This is not the glamorous Egypt of hieroglyphs and jeweled colors. This is Egypt's back kitchen, the hot, sticky, smoke-filled rooms where bread kept a civilization running. You'll be elbow-deep in dough by dawn and asleep on a soot-caked floor by dusk, if you're lucky. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up sweating beside a mud oven. Not a metaphor, just a plain, round, smoke-belching oven made of Nile silt and straw. Out the door, the village is barely stirring. The ancient Egyptians loved their bread almost as much as they feared what would happen without it. Bread was life. More than life. It was payment, offering, insurance, ritual, even afterlife food. And someone had to make it all. That someone is you. Now, the flour isn't exactly flour in the modern sense. And as the first glow of sunlight pushes in through the reed slats of the wall, you start shaping loaves. Outside, someone coughs. Another baker. Historians still argue whether these village bakeries were entirely independent or loosely managed under central grain quotas. Your oven called a tanner is now glowing softly. You take a moment leaning against the warm mud wall and close your eyes. A donkey brays in the distance. Time to turn the loaves. You've barely turned the loaves when someone barges in. Is the grain boy really just a bony teenager with a basket of emmer and barley slung over his back? You stare at the pile like it's your sworn enemy. Because now comes the worst part of the day, grinding. And you're doing it the old-fashioned way on a saddle quern, a flat stone with a handheld rubbing stone. Kneel, pour a scoop, and start pressing back and forth in rhythmic grinds that jar your wrists and scrape your knees. You'll do this for hours. The fine flour you need is buried under layers of chaff and husk, and it takes real effort to coax it out. Some recipes call for fine white flour, while others mention coarse grain. In some bakeries, they use rotary querns proto-grinders with a handle that turns a heavy top stone. Maybe being a fisherman's still hard work, sure, but at least there's wind and water. It's room temperature and slightly sour, but it gives you calories and a thin smile. Egyptians didn't drink water unless they had to. Not because they were picky, but because the Nile could be, well, unpredictable. Beer was safer-ish. You both look like you've been baking for 12 years straight, and neither of you is wrong. You're too tired to shoo it. It sniffs the flour pile, snorts in disapproval, and walks out. Even goats know better, but that's for later. For now, you just keep kneading. Because in ancient Egypt, you don't just work for bread or a potter. Clay doesn't scream when you shape it. Then again, potters still have to fire their work, and that means ovens. Some say bakers had calluses so thick they could pick up embers barehanded. You believe it. Your own hands already feel more like tools than body parts, and they never stop moving. When you aren't baking, you're prepping. When you aren't prepping, you're fixing a cracked oven wall with wet clay, chasing kids away from the flour pile, or folding palm fronds into makeshift cooling racks. And guess what? More heat, more sweat, more sleeping beside flames. You sigh. Everyone has it bad, but bakers especially. They have it hot and bad. But you don't have one. That's luxury tech. Some historians think these were more common later, while others argue they coexisted in wealthier households. You don't argue, you just grind. But no one's entirely sure what processes they used to create those distinctions. Some scholars argue that richer households had access to sieved, higher-grade flour. Others believe even that was wishful thinking, and all flour was basically chewy dirt. He smells like the river and his tunic is wet from the waist down, meaning he crossed the canal instead of using the plank. A fringe theory among archaeologists once suggested that ancient bakers deliberately left in grit to wear down consumers' teeth faster, forcing them to buy more bread. You chuckle to yourself, as if you've got time for evil schemes. Still, the reality is not much better. Most skeletons from this period show extreme tooth wear grinding down to the nerves. Bread was life, but it was also dental doom. First, you have to soak it, dry it, and then crush it carefully, so as not to damage the valuable kernels inside. The chaff clings like gossip at the temple gates. And it's gritty, which means that even after grinding, your bread will taste like you baked it with sand. Spoiler alert, you basically did. Again, you grunt at greeting, he grunts back. Words aren't necessary when everyone's too tired to care. He dumps the grain on the packed earth floor and vanishes. The emmer wheat is stubborn. It doesn't just shed its husk like modern grains. The funny thing is, this bread will still be considered food fit for royalty or the gods. Why? Because there's not much else. Sure, there are figs, dates, onions, and the occasional fish. You shift your weight on the woven mat under your knees, trying not to slip in the fine dust collecting everywhere. It floats through the air in golden streaks, catching sunlight and sticking to your sweat. You're part baker, part human breaded cutlet at this point. But bread is the main thing people eat. 2 or 3 times a day if you're lucky. Round it off with some watery beer and you've got yourself a complete meal. Ancient Egypt's version of a combo meal. By mid-morning, your shoulders scream. Now here's something historians debate. Were there different classes of flour? Ancient texts seem to suggest so. The saddle quern isn't your only tool, though. Occasionally, your mind wanders. You imagine a better life. The sun is climbing now. You pause to take a drink from a clay cup stale barley beer, more like weak porridge than alcohol. Now, the flour. You sift it through your fingers, checking for lumps and pebbles. There will always be some. Time to add water and knead again. It's a cycle. Always a cycle. You glance at the door. A woman from next door passes by with her basket. She nods. You nod back. No words, just solidarity. Just then, a goat pokes its head into the bakery. By noon, your body is dusted in flour, your mouth dry, and your head swimming with the thought that you still have to deliver these loaves. But that's for later. For now, you just keep kneading. Because in ancient Egypt, you don't just work for bread. You are the bread. Your arms move on autopilot. Now press, fold, press again until the dough finally softens into something resembling cooperation. You slap a lump down onto the wooden board with a side that's part relief, part resignation. 1 loaf down. 70-something to go. You'd think something as humble as bread would be gentle on your body, right? These microscopic particles end up in the flour, then in the dough, then in every loaf that crosses your lips. And over time, they grind on your teeth like a desert wind over limestone. Sounds dramatic, but it's true. Archaeologists have found ancient skulls with molars worn almost to the gum line, sometimes with exposed nerves. These poor souls were chewing on bread as if it were made from gravel because, in a way, it was. Think again. Here's the not-so-fun secret of Egyptian bread. It's trying to kill you slowly. Not from poison, no. Some loaves were made so hard they break your jaw. If someone in the village dies, you might get commissioned to bake 24 miniature loaves for the burial. These have to be shaped just right, discs, cones, and twisted rope-like patterns. The molds are made of clay, and some of them are finicky, always cracking when you pull the dough out too fast. If the inside gets too scorching, your loaves will blister, crack, even blacken at the bottom. Ancient ovens are like cranky old relatives, temperamental, unpredictable, full of smoke. The kind attached to a temple or granary where they use finer flour, better molds, maybe even stone benches to rest on. You scrape it off with a paddle and toss it in the cracked pot by the door. Maybe someone will still eat it, or the dog. It's your currency, your burden, your prayer, and your enemy. You sleep beside it, you bleed into it. You give it to the dead. You've heard stories, probably exaggerated. But still, the idea of baking in a cool, shaded room with assistants who don't eat the dough when your back is turned sounds like paradise. They hum when they're happy and belch smoke when they're not. You learn to read their moods, listen to their breath, feel their warmth without touching. Otherwise, you burn everything, including yourself. I brought grain, he croaks. 3 scoops. Can I get bread tomorrow? You nod. He leaves the grain. No coin changes hands. This is how it works in your village. Bread is trade, not commerce. You mark a symbol in the dust by the door to remind yourself. But if it cools too much, the dough turns to glue. You sigh and grab a wet cloth to cover the oven mouth for a few moments, just to cool things a little. You mumble under your breath and try again. The family's already grieving. They don't need defective symbolic bread on top of everything else. Others were buried with such care that it's clear they were valued offerings. Somewhere down the lane, a flute plays a few drifting notes. You don't look. You're still kneading, shaping, brushing flour off your forearms. One fringe theory even suggests that a different recipe was used: less grain, more ash to preserve the bread longer. Whether true or not, one thing's certain: your work doesn't stop when the client dies. You've been at this since you were a kid. Your mother taught you how to grind, your uncle taught you how to stoke the fire, and now you've got nephews learning how to dust flour off a blister. It's the family business, not that you asked for it. From grit. You remember the grinding stones? Well, they don't just crush grain, they also shed tiny fragments of sandstone. There's an old offering loaf up there, a little cracked, a little hardened, still perfectly shaped like a cow. It's not for eating, it's symbolic. Or maybe just a reminder, bread isn't just for the living, it's for the dead too. You press your tongue to the back of your own teeth and wonder what yours look like now. Probably not great. As you load another batch of dough into its baking mold, your eyes drift to the shelf above the oven. You couldn't just die and hope for the best. You had to prepare. And part of that preparation meant making sure your tomb was stocked with food real or symbolic to sustain your soul. Bread was priority number 1. So every funeral, every tomb carving, every elaborate burial rite involved bread. Loaves were sealed in jars, baked into ornate shapes, painted onto tomb walls, or included in little models of bakeries so that the spirit of the deceased could enjoy fresh loaves for eternity. That's where things get weird. See, Egyptians believed in a pretty serious afterlife setup. Historians still argue whether these funerary breads were meant to be consumed by the dead literally or just spiritually. And that means more work for you. Outside, the street bustles in that slow, sticky way it always does in the heat. You hear a woman yelling at a chicken, a dog barking back. A young boy runs in, eyes wide. My mother says the oven is too hot, he blurts, then runs off before you can reply. Too hot? You glance over at the side vent. Flames licking a little too high. It's not ideal. This dance between dough and flame is your life. You never stop adjusting. Sometimes, in the moments between loaves, you daydream about one of those fancy palace bakeries. You snapped back to reality when you hear a loud pop. A loaf on the back wall just burst open. You sigh, that one fermented too long. And just when you think you're done, someone else appears. An old man holding a small woven basket. Bread might be humble, but it's not simple. And if you're lucky, you'll have enough left for yourself. You don't really choose to sleep next to the oven. It's not cozy, it's not romantic, it's not even particularly safe. But when you're working from before sunrise to after sunset, when you're baking in batches so the loaves are ready for workers, priests, mourners, scribes, and the odd passing tax collector sometimes, sleep just happens where your legs give out. So you curl up on the dirt floor next to your tanner, a dome-shaped oven as cracked and worn as your own skin. It's still warm from the afternoon fire. The outside is made from Nile mud, straw, and crushed potsherds, a thick, pale skin that radiates heat long after the flames inside have died down. In cities like Amarna or Thebes, many houses seem to have had personal bread ovens. He feeds the fire in the evening, you check it at dawn. He's old now, slower than he used to be, with a hip that pops whenever he leans down. But he still brings wood, still mutters to the flames like they're old friends. You like that about him. You don't like his dog, which has taken a habit of snoring louder than your fire crackles. But nobody's perfect. But they did worship Taret, the hippo goddess who protected mothers and hearths. You've whispered to her once or twice when the oven flared too high or the dough threatened to collapse. No response, but it made you feel better. But in rural areas or cramped urban quarters, people likely shared a larger oven with their neighbors. A wild theory? That bakers created shallow body hollows beside their ovens, using the warm earth as a crude sleeping mat. A kind of protobed shaped by repetition. It's not official history, but it feels possible. You feel it in your bones every morning when you stretch and realize your spine now conforms to the curve of the oven wall. Which means, yes, you also share the responsibility of keeping that oven hot. Somewhere out there, a crocodile bellows in the Nile, low and distant. The wind rustles the papyrus reeds outside your hut, but here, next to your fire belly, all is still. You rest your cheek on your arm and close your eyes to the sound of embers sighing. Now, why would someone deliberately sleep next to a literal fire hazard? Leaving your precious batch unattended overnight is an invitation for chaos. If the night is too cold, it won't rise. Too hot, and it turns sour. Others believe they understood fermentation well enough to create naturally leavened loaves. Bits of old beer mash, perhaps, or a clump of last week's dough kept alive like a sourdough starter. Historians still argue whether true leavened bread was common or a luxury. You don't argue. You just know that sometimes your dough bubbles and rises like it has a mind of its own, and sometimes it sits there like a sun-baked lump. Life is unpredictable, so is yeast. So you wrap the bowl in linen and place it near the oven wall just close enough to catch the warmth, just far enough to avoid baking it by accident. You've ruined a few batches learning that lesson. Rats, children, beetles, even the odd desperate cat all have taken a swipe at your bread in the past. Sleeping nearby means you can swat away threats with a sleepy hand and a mumbled curse. Good question. For one, wood is scarce. You continue to just go wandering into the desert, chopping trees. They were not exactly waiting in line to be cut. Egyptian nights can be surprisingly cold, especially near the water. And if your house has open slats or thin mud walls, the wind will find its way in. The oven is your heater, your bread maker, your security blanket. Until it spits an ember and sets your tunic smoldering. That's happened, twice. You don't like to talk about it. Fuel costs time and effort, bundles of acacia, palm fronds, sometimes even dried animal dung. They're usually shaped like an upside-down pot, wide at the base with a narrow mouth at the top. You reach in with a flat paddle or use your bare hands if you re-confident and have already sacrificed your fingerprints to the bacon gods. Dough is slapped onto the interior walls, where it cooks rapidly in the retained heat. Flatbreads take just minutes, loaves a little longer. Either way, the oven never leaves your side. If the coals die out overnight, you have to start the whole process from scratch. So keeping the heat alive becomes your midnight insurance policy. But also, there's something to be said for the warmth. The design of these ancient ovens is clever in a kind of I hope you enjoy mine or burns way. Historians still argue whether the average home had its own oven or whether people used communal bakeries. The truth is probably both. You and your neighbor Kiba have an unofficial system. There's another reason you stick close to the oven, dough security. And let's not forget the fermenting dough itself. It's alive in a way. Temperature sensitive. Some say Egyptians didn't use yeast, but they only made flatbreads, quick to cook and easier to control. There's even a god for this sort of. The Egyptians didn't have a god of ovens, and here is a fringe tidbit for you. Archaeologists have found strange imprints in the ash near some ovens' small circular marks, almost like someone had been lying there. You roll over in the night and catch the faint glow of coals still breathing. Tomorrow the bread must rise again. But for now, you sleep, warm, soot-stained, dreaming of loaves. You wake before the sun. Again, your body now works on oven time, not daylight. And the dough from last night? It's ready. Maybe you prod it gently with a flour-dusted finger and watch it jiggle, then settle. The difference seems small, but in your world it means everything. See, bread in ancient Egypt wasn't just food. It was identity, class, timing, temperature, and something as simple as air bubbles and dough could separate. A Proust-esque snack from a worker's breakfast. It's grown, but not dramatically. A little sour, a little sticky, a little unsure of itself, kind of like you. There's no hard evidence of little clay jars marked active dry after all. Not always out loud, not always kindly. But they become part of the process. When the coals flare too high, you scold Sekhmet for stirring up the flames. When the dough rises beautifully, you thank Happy for blessing the air. A soft dome forms, golden and freckled. You tilt your head, watching through the vent. You think it's working. It's not religion, really, it's more like habit. Or a coping mechanism, or both. But there is evidence of both flatbreads and loaves with what look like internal pockets suggesting fermentation. You slide it out carefully, using the cloth-wrapped paddle. She shakes her head and gestures toward the temple road. They'll want 20 by sundown, she says. Flat, with seals. It's not perfect, one side cracks slightly, and there is a dark patch near the bottom, but it's soft and warm and undeniably bread. Not hot, not cold, warm. Which means perfect timing, minimal rest, and absolutely no kitchen disasters. You sigh and start kneading the new batch. It's going to be a long day. You smile just a little. You don't get to decide the shape, size, or recipe. It's all prescribed. These loaves aren't meant to be eaten by people, not really. They're for the altars. The gods, which, to be honest, means the priests. Then you immediately start prepping the next round, because success never lasts longer than the next kneading session. This is the risky part. With flatbread, you know what's coming, but leavened bread? It teases. It hints at greatness. Then, just as easily, it collapses into a sunken crater that tastes like disappointment. The process would have been accidental at first. You leave a bit of old dough out. It catches some wild yeast from the air, it bubbles, and when you bake it, you get something softer, chewier, even slightly tangy. You smell crushed onions frying in someone's clay pot. It makes sense. Beer and bread were made from nearly identical ingredients: grain, water, time, and heat. Some scholars think brewers and bakers worked side by side, sharing techniques and supplies. Others argue the overlap was exaggerated. You don't have a strong opinion. You've scraped sludge from the bottom of a beer vat before and added it to your dough. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it smells like goat hoofs. A donkey trudges by, hooves clopping in a tired rhythm. But you're focused. Your oven is alive now, glowing with potential. A miracle or a fluke. Or, in your case, a ticking time bomb that can go wrong faster than you can say overproofed. Now comes the moment of truth. Do you bake it flat and fast, or try your luck with a puffier leavened loaf? She held up a bubbling jar of beer mash and said, "This, my love, is a ghost that eats sugar and farts air." You'd laugh so hard you nearly dropped the paddle. But she was right. Yeast is alive, invisible, ancient, and terrifyingly moody. You've never forgotten that. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians truly understood how to control yeast. Most of your neighbors stick to flatbread. It's quick, predictable, and doesn't require trust. But some bakers, especially the ones working for temples or the estate granaries, have begun experimenting. You pinch and fold it into a tight round, dust the surface with crushed emmer, and nestle it into the warming pan. The shape matters. Too wide and it sags, too narrow and it cracks. You whisper a little prayer to Renunutet, goddess of nourishment and harvest, and hope she's paying attention. They leave dough out longer, treat it like a baby, wrapping it in linen, sheltering it from breezes, keeping it warm near the coals. You've tried it yourself. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it slumps over like a tired donkey. Right now, your dough looks hopeful. You decide to go for it. And here's the strange part. Even if you don't believe in the gods, you find yourself talking to them. You slide the loaf into the oven, holding your breath as it begins to set. Meanwhile, the village is stirring. You hear laughter down the lane, children being chased away from the date seller's stall. The loaf starts to puff, not dramatically. Not like the fluffy bread sold in marketplaces of later centuries, but just enough to lift its shoulders. You remember the first time someone explained yeast to you. You were maybe 12, working with your aunt. Fringe theory time. There is a debate among researchers about whether Egyptians used leftover beer sediment to help leaven their bread. The loaf's ready. Outside, the woman from the granary walks by with her assistant. She nods when she sees the loaf. You hold it up slightly, a silent offer. The temple bread. That's a whole different beast. Temple loaves are stamped with marks, usually the symbol of the god they're being offered to. And here's the kicker. You have to deliver them warm. Still, that one loaf, puffed, slightly cracked, warm in your hands, sits beside the oven like a quiet triumph. You might not be able to prove yeast is real, but this loaf is. And it roasts for you. By the time the temple batch is rising, the whole bakery smells like someone set fire to a haystack and then tried to smother it with beer. You've long since stopped noticing. But every so often, someone new passes by, usually a traveling scribe or a visiting relative, and they wrinkle their nose, blink rapidly, and say something like, "Does it always smell like this?" Yes, it does. A sharp, almost cheesy tang that creeps into your nostrils and makes you question your life choices. Not in a perfume it and sell it way, but in a this means home kind of way. The air, thick with flour dust and wood smoke, becomes part of your skin. Your very sweat takes on the scent. You are the bakery now. Between the fire, the flour dust, and the constant crouching, your lungs, back, and joints don't stand a chance. He said he'd walked past the bakery every day for 15 years and couldn't smell anything anymore. The ingredients overlap: grain, water. He and some archaeological digs have found bakeries with sunken vats nearby, possibly used for brewing. But whether it was a shared operation or just a neighborly arrangement remains unclear. You don't have brewing gear in your place, but the family 2 doors down? They ferment beer in the mornings and sell it by sunset. The scent will follow you to the granary, to the temple steps, even home, where your family will sniff the air and say, "You run a damp cloth over your arms and face." Doesn't help. You still smell like someone tried to roast beer dough in a pit latrine, but you shrug. It's a baker's badge. You've been baking again, as if that isn't every day. You trade loaves for jars once a week. It's a good deal. Said he missed it? That's when you realize the scent is more than just smell, it's memory. Maybe even identity. Your entire life is tied to this smoke, this dough, this constant haze of effort. But did anyone care? Not really. Bread must be made. The beer mash fermenting in the corner doesn't help either, just for a moment. The sun filters through the cracks in the reed slats above your head, casting soft shadows on the smoke-darkened wall. Children laughing somewhere, though they're probably playing with your unused baskets again. Not pleasant, but comforting. Like a bad blanket you've had for years and can't throw away. It's not meant to be liked. It's meant to wrap around you and say, "You're still here." A woman calls out for her son. Someone else yells at a goat. You rest your back against the warm clay dome and close your eyes. Together, it smells like someone tried to make soup in a pair of sweaty sandals. The scent of a working Egyptian bakery is a full-body experience. Smoke curls up from the oven's mouth in lazy spirals, clinging to your tunic and hair. Slap, shape, press. You sprinkle flour from the palm-woven basket, but it does nothing to stop the dough from sticking to your fingers. You mutter at it like it's a stubborn mule. The wood isn't really wood, it's whatever you could find. Palm fronds, bundles of reeds, even dried animal dung if the fuel pile runs low. So the smoke is heavy, acrid, a little sweet, and completely impossible to scrub out. It's the signature smell of the working poor. You could follow the trail of ash and doughy funk straight to the Nile. Then there's the sour edge of fermenting dough. When you leave it out too long or on purpose, if you're gambling on a puffier loaf, it starts to talk back. But here's the strange thing, you grow to love it. You reach for another dough ball, your arms moving with the mechanical grace of long habit. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes violently. Probably one of the boys from down the road. The flour gets into everyone's nose, even when you try to keep it down. One time, you tried wetting the stone floor before grinding to keep the dust from rising. All it did was turn the bakery into a mud pit and ruin a whole batch of flour when someone dropped the jar. Lesson learned. You just live with the sneezes now. Fringe theory alert. There are scholars who believe the constant smoke exposure contributed to shorter lifespans among ancient urban workers, bakers especially. One day, a man stumbled in, red-faced and coughing so hard he dropped his grain basket. Historians still argue whether Egyptian bakeries were separate from brew houses or whether they operated under the same roof. As the day stretches into its lazy midpoint, you sit down finally beside the oven. You can hear everything even with your eyes shut. The distant thump of grinding stones. The rhythmic splat of dough hitting baking paddles. You inhale, and there it is again. The familiar perfume of smoke, sweat, flour, and yeast. You get up. Slowly, knees crack, shoulders protest. There's a batch to turn, another to knead, more to deliver. You scrub your hands in a basin near the door, though the flour's in your nail beds to stay. And tonight? You'll fall asleep beside that oven again. Clothes smoky, hair stiff with ash. Nose full of that never-leaving scent. Because in ancient Egypt, bread doesn't take breaks. And neither do you? The last round of temple loaves cools beside the oven, their stamped tops still steaming. You wipe your brow with the back of your arm and glance at the little wooden seal resting nearby. It's the symbol of Hathor today, goddess of love, music, joy, and most inconveniently, expectations. She doesn't make eye contact, just deposits a small jar of barley mash on your work table. For the tomb. You press the seal into the soft loaves like you mean it, then stack them on a reed tray lined with clean linen. They'll be carried to the temple before sunset, placed on an altar, and left to feed the gods until the priests eventually snack on them behind closed doors. You feel a small pang, not grief, exactly, but something quieter. She was part of the background hum of your days, like the smoke or the donkeys, and now she's gone. You shake out your aching hands and stretch your back. But just as you start to dream of an early night, a familiar voice pokes its way through the doorway. "We need another batch," says Merritt, one of the granary assistants. Some loaves found sealed in tomb jars were clearly never touched. Others show bite marks, either from grave robbers or the living relatives sneaking a snack during funerals. Then another shaped like a goose. Happy probably would have scoffed at the idea of eating goose bread. You dust them with ash from the fire pit, an old tradition said to bless the bread with protection. Or maybe it's just habit. Everything in Egypt has layers, ritual, practicality, superstition, symbolism. Sometimes you're not even sure which is which anymore, but you do it anyway. It's what her family asked for, and what the dead might need. Just in case. It's a not-so-subtle reminder of the social order. You work, they rest. Even in death. But occasionally, you'll see a different kind of image. Bakers included in offering scenes, hands raised in blessing, or standing behind the gods themselves. Those rare moments hint that maybe, just maybe, someone once believed your work mattered on a deeper level. Long shadows stretch across the alleyways, and the air cools enough that your sweat finally starts to dry. The oven's still warm. The coals blink sleepily in the dark. The scent of funerary loaves still lingers, faint and sweet. Not like joy, not like sorrow either, something in between. You walk the basket of loaves down the road with merit, passing other bakers closing up, children throwing stones at a cluster of lazy pigeons, and a scribe furiously trying to copy a scroll before the light fades. There's even a theory that some bread was made of mud or clay, painted to look real, especially in poorer burials. They chant softly. A priest burns incense. Her wrapped body lies on a simple bier, surrounded by offerings, onions, dried fish, beer jugs, and your bread. You set the tray down without ceremony. No one claps, no one notices, but you always know. Just something to fool the gods or make things look proper. You pause. Who died? Not physically, just symbolically. These aren't for priests or pharaohs. They're for someone who won't get a second chance to eat again, from the weaver's quarter. Hepi. A Hepi, you remember her. Sharp-tongued, always shouting at her loom. She once scolded a priest so thoroughly for overcharging her that the whole market paused to watch. Some shaped like fish, others like lotus buds, depending on the family's instructions. It's not just tradition, it's insurance. Egyptians believed the dead needed food in the afterlife. No food, no comfort. So people buried the deceased with bread, beer, onions, and even little clay models of food production scenes, men grinding grain, women kneading dough, tiny ovens with fires frozen mid-roar. That means funerary loaves. A dozen at least. You've seen them. They're eerie. Little versions of you trapped forever in a tomb baking ghost loaves for eternity. You sigh and begin again. The dough for funerary loaves is different. Not in ingredients, really, but in ritual. You work slower. You shape each piece with care. If you're superstitious, you sprinkle just a touch of natron natural salt into the dough for purification, not too much. You want the loaf to last in the tomb, not mummify itself mid-bake. Historians still debate whether these offerings were ever meant to be eaten or were purely symbolic. You don't know about that. But you do know that funerary loaves feel heavier in your hands. You shape a lotus loaf and press a thumbprint into the center. A few loaves go into pottery jars sealed with damp clay to keep air out. Others are arranged on flat trays. By the time the loaves are ready for the tomb, the sun is dipped behind the rooftops. At the small shrine beside Hedepi's home, mourners have gathered. And that is when it hits you. You've probably made more bread for the dead than for the living. Fringe observation time, some anthropologists have noted that bakers often appear in tomb art, shown hard at work, usually shirtless and sweaty, while the tomb owner lounges nearby. You walk back in the dusk, feet sore, hands dusty, head full of yeast and ghosts. When you return, the bakery is quiet. You sit beside it and stretch your legs. Tomorrow you'll rise and bake again. Because bread doesn't wait. Not even for the dead. You sleep, but it isn't deep. No baker in Egypt ever truly sleeps. Your dreams are full of flower storms and collapsing loaves, of smoke that turns to hands and tugs you back to the fire. When you wake, it is not to birdsong or temple bells. It's to the smell of barley beer being poured next door and the groan of your own joints arguing with the morning. A fat, puffed mound overproofed, probably. You grumble under your breath, then peel back the linen and prod it gently. Not ruined, but close. The dough is already waiting. Left to rise overnight in the corner, covered with a linen cloth weighted down by a chipped jug. It looks a bit too proud of itself. When winter comes, and yes, Egypt does have chilly mornings. Especially in the Delta, you'll see families crowding around ovens, not to bake, but just to feel their bones thaw out. This batch is for market small round loaves to be sold by the reed bundle. You press them gently against the oven wall, the dough sticking to the hot clay with a soft hiss. Not just the yeast, but the whole act. You're feeding people, with your hands, with your heat, with your effort. It's not glorious, but it's constant. You don't need a timer, you are the timer. You rub flour off your palms, stretch your spine, and watch a neighbor pass by with a goat in tow. That they lived in special quarters, worked in shifts, and baked loaves by the hundreds, sometimes shaped like birds, sometimes flavored with dates or carrot pods. Even the workers who pulled stones bigger than houses, he said, still started their day with bread. He nods. You nod. It's the closest thing to conversation either of you has energy for this early in the day. It makes you feel a little connected. Like you and those ancient hands baking under the desert sun 400 years ago are part of the same flower-covered lineage. You count in the rhythm of chores. By the time you fetched water or turned the grinding stone once, the bread is ready to flip or pull. There's always a next batch, always someone hungry, always someone grieving, always a priest needing offering loaves or a neighbor hoping for a trade, not like a priest's magic note spells or curses, but something gentler, the ability to coax food from dust, warmth from fuel, life from grain. It's superstition, sure, but when your dough rises perfectly, when the crust sings as it cools, you feel it. Maybe it's not nonsense after all. 3 loaves for 1 bundle, 5 bundles for a jar of dates. Sometimes, if you're lucky, someone brings honey, a rare treat. Not the kind of thing you eat yourself, no, that's for your eldest, or maybe for offering on festival days. You've grown used to chewing the same bread day in and day out, sometimes with a raw onion or a smudge of sour curd for variety. But honey? That's like eating sunlight. It's the closest thing most homes have to a fireplace. That's the danger with overnight fermentation. 1 hour too long and your loaf becomes more air than food. You'd scolded her, of course, but you remember thinking she wasn't wrong. He has 1 tooth and 1,000 stories. He once told you the gods like flatbread, but they respect the ones who make the good round stuff. You laugh then, but you think about it every time a loaf comes out just right. 1 hour too short and it bakes up like a brick. The oven is warming up again, belching lazy curls of smoke through the side vent. You stoke it with dried reeds and a few bits of dung, surprisingly effective fuel, and hope the flames behave better than they did yesterday. Now here's a fact most people don't realize. Ancient Egyptian ovens weren't just functional, they were architectural. Built into homes, often as a central feature of the courtyard or cooking area, they were designed to be long-lasting. The oven you use is older than you. It was built by your uncle, who learned the craft from his father, who rebuilt it after the Great Nile flood of, well, some year no one bothered to write down. The mud brick walls are patched with layers of history, charm marks, handprints, and occasional child-sized scratches where your niece once pretended it was a lion's cave. Historians still argue whether these ovens doubled as heating sources for the home or were purely for baking. In your case, they're both. You divide the dough and begin shaping loaves. 1 loaf goes in, 2 more follow. Still, the process doesn't feel mechanical. Not exactly. There's something alive about it. There's an old man who comes by sometimes. He says he used to be a baker in a temple complex down south near Abydos, maybe. A fringe belief you've heard from visiting traders. Some say bakers have a kind of magic. The first batch of market loaves cools beside the oven. You remember your father once telling you that in the time of the Old Kingdom, bakers fed thousands of workers at the pyramids. Historians confirm that those pyramid builders weren't slaves but paid workers, and their diet? Bread and beer twice a day. But that doesn't make your feet hurt any less. You finish wrapping the market loaves in damp linen to keep them soft and start preparing for the next batch. You glance at the oven, the embers shifting like sleepy eyes in the ash. And you know, you'll be here tomorrow too. Because in Egypt, long before scrolls or pharaohs or golden tombs, there was bread. And someone had to make it. By midday, the heat is no longer just an inconvenience. It's a full-blown wall of flame wrapping around your body and settling in the hollow of your back. The oven, loyal as ever, radiates a steady wave of punishment. And then you wait, crouched just enough to make your knees grumble. In practice, you're pretty sure you'll die before that happens. You're used to it, of course, but some days it feels more personal. Like the sun in your oven got together last night and decided to roast you from both sides. You hum a little tune under your breath, the market song, maybe? Or something your grandmother used to sing. You don't remember the words, just the sway of it. On bad days, it resists, sticks, collapses. When you bake like this, hour after hour, your fingertips change. They toughen, smooth out. You lose your fingerprints. Or maybe they just get replaced with new ones, one shaped like the bottom of a mixing bowl or the ridges of a clay mold. You laughed, but then remembered how often you've hauled a sack of grain, carried hot pottery, or wrestled an uncooperative dough ball into submission. Crisp-edged, golden, still singing slightly as the steam escapes. You line it on the shelf beside the door, where the village kids will come by and stare longingly until someone tosses them a slightly burnt piece. You always pretend to grumble, but they know you'll do it. Not glamorous work, but it forges a kind of quiet strength. Some depict bakers as bare-chested laborers, sweating beside flames, hardly different from slaves. The dough that sang in the oven during a festival, the baker who fed a god in disguise. You don't know which are true, and you don't care. You like that they exist. You stir the coals gently, more out of affection than necessity. Others show them carefully shaping ritual loaves, included in scenes of offerings, sometimes even standing beside priests. You showed everyone, no one believed you, but you remember. You still dream about it sometimes. Not the warrior's biceps, but the baker's back. On good days, it puffs like it's smiling. Your niece used to hum the same thing while helping roll dough. That the energy of the baker, their hopes, their worries, their health was absorbed into the dough. People need you, but they don't often thank you. They respect the bread maybe more than the hands that made it. The flour clings to your skin, your hair, even your eyelashes. At some point, you stop trying to get clean. You just learn to live as a human loaf. You laughed when you first heard that, but then, maybe it's not so far off. Gratitude, trust, maybe even reverence. You stare at the wall, where years ago someone drew a picture and saw just a little man holding a paddle, smiling like an idiot. You think it might have been your nephew, or maybe you, bored one day. It's faded, but still there. After all, you've seen dough rise differently when you're angry. Maybe not science, but something. She's married now, off to the fishmonger's family in the next village. You don't see her much. You press another loaf onto the inner wall, shifting your wrist just right so it sticks cleanly. It makes a soft slap like dough kissing clay. In theory, someone should invent a more comfortable way to do this. There's a rhythm to this life, if not a luxury. Bake, flip, grind, sweep, stoke. The bread today is better than average. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's the jar of beer mash you left half open by accident, which lent the dough a sharp little kick. That's the thing about bread, it responds to the tiniest variables. Humidity, mood, even the flour's mood if you believe in that kind of thing. Some days it feels like the dough knows what kind of day you're having. Fringe idea time. A few traveling mystics once claimed that bread could feel intention. You step back and stretch. The bakery's open-air roof lets in some breeze, but mostly it just lets the heat swirl around. And here's a curious detail one the scribes never bother to write down. You catch sight of your hands in the water bowl and hardly recognize them. Broad, cracked, burn-marked, stronger than they have any right to be. Your cousin once joked that a baker could strangle a crocodile. You pull the bread from the oven. Perfect. Historians still argue whether bakers were considered low status or honored artisans. The tombs and scrolls are inconsistent. You're not sure where you fall on that spectrum. Still, when someone brings you grain with a quiet, "This is for my brother's ceremony," you see it in their eyes. You finish the last round and sit back. A rare lull. In the quiet, you think about bread myths. Every village has one. The loaf that saved a child from a jackal. You've even got your own tale. A few years ago, you swear a loaf came out of the oven shaped like a falcon. The oven grumbles, a little puff of smoke slipping out like a sigh. Tomorrow there will be more bread to make. But for now, you let the warmth seep into your bones, your shoulders sag, your hands rest. The village may not sing songs about you, but its heartbeat still smells like flour and smoke. The sun creeps lower, casting long ochre stripes across the floor of the bakery. The light now glows like baked clay, and the air feels thick enough to slice. It's barely a stool anymore, just a half-broken hunk of palm wood with one leg shorter than the rest. Inside, the last of the morning's flour, a bit dusty, slightly coarse. Not your best batch. But it'll do for the evening loaves, which are never expected to look beautiful, just to fill stomachs before bed. But it rocks in rhythm with your spine, which has learned to curve exactly like the stool over the years. Often mixed with whatever's left, bits of lentil, crushed onion, or even mashed dates if someone dropped off a bundle in trade. The bowl is wide, heavy, worn smooth by generations of hands. The oven is starting to wind down, the coals a deep sleepy red. Women returning from the river with laundry. Boys chasing chickens through the dust. Now you hum, quietly, mostly to the bread. It's nonsense, of course. Unless it isn't, you still do it. Just in case. You flick it off the slab and hand it to the kid watching from the doorway. No questions asked. He takes it like it's treasure and runs off before anyone can claim it. You pretend not to notice. That's part of the game. You gave her the softest round you'd ever made, and she handed it to him wordlessly when he returned. They never said what changed. But the next morning, they were both back at your door holding hands, asking for 2 more. Creating something warm and round began as part of burial rites. That bread and death have always been linked, not by chance, but by ancient design. You're not a scholar, but standing here in the smoke haze light, it doesn't feel so far-fetched. Someone sings an old love song off-key, loud, cheerful. You know the voice. It's Nebeth, the papyrus seller. He always sings when he's sold well. Just enough heat left to cook one final round. You don't add wood. You don't stoke. You just let it fade. You don't even think anymore. Your fingers do the remembering. You call them closing loaves. Not because they close the day exactly, but because you make them when your strength is about to. That's the thing with this work. Your body changes to match the tools. Knees angled just so. Fingers thick from kneading. But it feels like the perfect number anyway. Not too much. Not too little. Just enough for the house. Skin toughened by 100 tiny burns. It's as much a part of Egyptian identity as the Nile or the temples. That golden, nutty scent drifting through the alleyways. It announces the end of toil. It softens arguments. It makes neighbors talk again. You notice time of day by smell alone smoke gone lazy, heat curling up instead of out, and the faint sour-sweet perfume of crust cooling. It's the lull, the soft exhale before the evening rush. You pull your stool closer to the oven. You brush crumbs off your tunic and reach for the storage jar. There's a specific kind of bread for this time of day, short, dense, fast cooking. You add water from a clay jug that sweats in the heat, sprinkle in a pinch of salt more out of habit than necessity, and begin mixing. Now here's something odd you once heard from a traveling priest. He claimed that in the field of reeds, the Egyptian afterlife, everyone gets their own perfect loaf, fresh from the god's oven, warm forever, never burning your fingers. No kneading, no smoke, no sore knees. You laughed. But part of you wants to believe it. Was it spiritual sustenance? Was it metaphor? Was it simply a way to keep the soul from being hungry, which might make it restless? One famous theory says the loaves symbolized rebirth, the rising of the dough, echoing the rising of the spirit. Poetic, messy, maybe even true. Historians still debate what role bread played in funerary rituals beyond the physical loaves. You roll the dough into little balls, flatten them slightly, and lay them on a slab that's already hot from the sun. Meanwhile, outside, the village has slipped into its pre-night shuffle. You used to sing too, before the smoke scratched your voice down to gravel. Another quirky fact? Some older bakers swear that singing to dough makes it rise better. One of the closing loaves bubbles awkwardly on the side. It was rolled too thick. You sit back and admire the tray. 11 loaves, one short, thanks to the boy. And here's something few realize. The smell of fresh bread at sunset? You remember a time a long time ago when a single loaf settled a marriage dispute. A husband stormed out. A wife wept. You flipped the loaves once, twice. The oven breathed slow now. Tired, like you. Fringe theory to leave you thinking. Some believe that the first ovens were born not in homes, but in graves. That the practice of heating clay over fire, shaping it, the loaves are ready. You take them out one by one, brushing off ash. Each one small, misshapen, perfect. The day is over. The fire sleeps. And so soon will you. You sleep in shifts now. Not because one of your body is begging for one long, sweet stretch of uninterrupted rest, but because the fire has its own schedule, and the dough never learned patience. The kind of darkness that presses into your ears and hums behind your eyes. You grope for your sandals by memory and shuffle out, toes numb from the cool clay floor. Outside, the stars are smeared across the sky like flour on black linen. And the moon hangs low, yellowed and solemn, like a loaf pulled too soon from the oven. Tonight, like most nights, you wake in the deep dark. It's foamy, frothy, alive. You smile despite yourself. The yeast is feeling ambitious. No children running past, no donkeys braying at each other, no priests demanding perfectly sealed offerings. Just faint pops, like distant sand crabs clicking their claws. It's the yeast doing its thing, eating, burping, building bread. You press it flat, fold it into itself like a secret, and store it in a tiny pot near the oven. It's temperamental too cold and it sulks, too hot and it dies. And enjoy the best part of the job, the moment right before the first forms. One old woman once asked you to whisper a name into the dough for her grandson's safety before he left for the mines. You did. You still remember the name. It feels wrong to say it out loud now, as if it's still trapped somewhere inside that loaf. When the dough is still vulnerable, trembling ever so slightly, skin just beginning to toughen. You imagine if you touched it too soon, it would shiver. But treat it right and it rewards you with better bread every time. Not out loud, not dramatically, just a soft breath of gratitude. Science now, but it used to feel like magic. Scarred your elbows, cracked your nails. Cursed it, praised it, slept beside it like it was kin. You can't argue with that. Or rather, you can, but you'd just be shouting at a brick wall in gold eyeliner. Just you, the sleeping coals, and the weight of the silence. You've always liked this hour. Not quite night, not yet morning, the world's in between. Like a held breath. The birds haven't started yet, but the dogs have. Leaning against its rounded side, arms folded. Like something carved out of time. The soot on the walls seems deeper, the grain jar larger, the oven taller. You feel small inside it. Like you've stepped into a story instead of a building. One howls in the distance. Another barks somewhere, a pot clatters. The bakery is quiet. You've done this 100 times. Wake, stoke the fire, check the fermenting dough, shape a few rounds, sleep again. They're crusty on one side, pale on the other. Night-baked loaves always are. But they're perfect for dipping into morning beer or crumbling into porridge. You stack them in a reed basket and set it by the door. Someone will come by, they always do. But tonight you pause. You move carefully, because something's off. Not dramatically, not like it's been cursed by an overenthusiastic grain god, but enough that you know it's ahead of schedule. Too warm tonight, probably. The air clings, thick and sweet, like the bakery itself is sweating. The dough jar, usually bulging just slightly, is overflowing. You mutter under your breath and scoop some of it into a basin. Here's something fun you've picked up over the years. You can actually hear the dough fermenting. If the bakery's quiet enough, historians still argue whether Egyptian bakers intentionally pitched yeast from batch to batch, the way modern bakers might use sourdough starter. There's some evidence that old dough was saved and mixed with new, a practice called backslopping charming, right? But whether it was for flavor, fermentation, or just because nothing went to waste is still debated. Whatever the reason, you always keep a scrap aside. You shape a few emergency loaves now, small rounds meant to tide over the early risers' temple guards. Fisherman, the overzealous priest who insists that his god prefers his offerings before sunrise. As you place the loaves on the oven's shoulder to bake slowly in the residual heat, you sit back there as a fringe belief among village elders that this is the moment bread becomes aware, just a flicker of soul, enough to carry prayers or wishes. The air begins to shift. A warm breeze slides in from the east, and you know the sun isn't far behind. And just like that, the bakery is awake again. You pull the loaves from the oven, you pause and look around. In this light dim, gold-edged, uncertain, the bakery looks older. You touch the oven's side, warm now, but fading. Like an old dog curled beside your feet. You thank it quietly. You've burned your hands on this oven, and in a way it is. It knows you. And you? You know when to feed it, when to leave it alone, when to trust its silence. You close your eyes for a moment, just a moment. There's another batch to prepare, but for now you just rest. Because in Egypt, the fire never really sleeps. And neither do you. The bakery is never silent for long. Just as the stars begin to melt into pale morning, the first knock comes soft, polite, the sound of someone trying not to wake the whole neighborhood. You already know who it is. You unlash the reed mat that serves as your door and peek out. Sure enough, it's the temple boy. He thanks you, tucks the tablet into his belt, and wanders off, probably to find a date cake or cup of beer before his chores begin. Another day, another mountain of grain to grind, water to carry, dough to coax. He doesn't know you watched him be born. Doesn't know you've been baking for the temple since before he had teeth, and he probably wouldn't care. Kids never do. It's part holy rite, part village carnival. There will be music, boats, noise, and most relevant to your aching back, no temple orders. You're already behind. Women sing while applying coal, vendors shout over crates of cucumbers and jars of honey beer, children bang sticks together like drums. It's chaos but cheerful chaos. That by imprinting a god's face into the food, you were asking for favor or warding off misfortune. You're not sure you believe it, but it's hard to argue with the instinct. When things go bad, when the floods come too early or too hard, you start stamping more loaves than usual. Barefoot, hair a mess, holding a little clay tablet that confirms what you've already guessed. These festival loaves sometimes include date paste, ground carob, or even a trickle of sesame oil if you're lucky. She laughed so hard she cried. They've had 3 children since. They still come by your bakery every year, ask for the same loaf. You oblige, though the mold's cracked now and the duck looks more like a lopsided cat. They're not for sale, these were ordered last week. Not really, it's for you, a thank you. But please keep the fire burning a little longer. You don't even take it to the shrine. Little duck gods and lotus flowers and suns with smiling faces. You line them up like soldiers and grin. If someone told you this was your art, you'd laugh, but maybe it is. You just place it in the shadow of the oven, right where the coals start to sleep. That's good enough. The bakery's not closed, but it can pause. Paid for with a goat's leg and a promise to repaint your outer wall. You didn't argue. Paint's expensive, so is goat. Somewhere a woman calls for her daughter, voice lost in the din. You smell roasted fish. Perfume, dust, sweat, all of it laced with that undercurrent of excitement, the electricity of not working for once. They smell less like survival and more like hope. Offerings for sunrise, he mutters, barely awake. The oven cooperates for once, its heat steady, even tempered, no flare-ups. No cold spots, you take it as a blessing. You nod in hand over the reed basket of night-baked loaves. We find molds, yes, but were they widespread? Or reserved for the urban elite? Some argue that village folk wouldn't have wasted flour on shapes, but that's nonsense. You've seen people go hungry for 3 days just to make one good offering. When it comes to celebration, no one wants to be left out. You step back inside and roll your shoulders. Then tap it out and set it to rest on a cloth-covered tray. You've got 10 more to do, and then the baking dance begins. Except not today. Because today's the festival of the beautiful meeting when Hathor and Horus reunite in a grand river procession. You still have to bake, of course. People eat more on festival days. But the loaves are different, celebratory, decorative, sometimes even sweetened. They're shaped like lotus blossoms, ducks, even miniature gods. Not for the rich, necessarily, just for families who scrape together enough to make something pretty for once. You pull out your special reed molds, the ones you save for these kinds of occasions. As you begin mixing the first batch, the street outside stirs to life. You roll out a dough disc and press it gently into the mold. It takes the shape beautifully, a perfect image of Bes, the protective dwarf god, tongue out, eyes wide. You smile. Not because it's funny though it is, but because this is your favorite part of baking, making something fun. Something joyful, fringe note? Some old-school bakers believe that the act of shaping dough into divine forms wasn't just decorative, it was protective. As you bake, the smell shifts richer, sweeter. You remember one festival where a young man bought a duck-shaped loaf, then proposed to his sweetheart with it. Historians still puzzle over how common these festival loaves were. You press another dough ball into a lotus mold. Carefully, slowly. By now, the streets are humming. A drummer passes by, followed by a man balancing 5 painted jugs on his head. But for you, the fire never stops. You load the loaves in batches. 1, 2, 3. While you wait, you wrap the cooled loaves in linen scraps. You also prepare a tray for your own offering. Just one loaf shaped like a seated goddess. It's not for the gods. And now the loaves are done. Golden, fragrant. You sweep the ash aside, wash your arms, tie your tunic a little tighter. You step outside. The street greets you with noise, color, laughter, and the river sparkling just visible between 2 buildings. And for a moment, just a moment, you're not the baker. You're just someone in the crowd watching a god float by. By late afternoon, the festival has swallowed the village whole. Musicians parade past your door, banging drums with the kind of enthusiasm only possible on an empty stomach. The oven is cooled now, its last flames banked into a dull red hush. For once, you're not elbow deep in dough. For once, your hands aren't moving. Perfumed women in linen robes toss flower petals into the dust. Priests in gold-threaded sashes chant so loudly you can feel it in your teeth. She waves at you. You wave back. Hers are topped with sesame seeds fancy. She only bakes on holidays. Her kitchen probably still smells like smoke and melted beeswax. And somewhere, always somewhere, a child is crying because their honey cake fell in the mud. You sit just outside the bakery, perched on your usual stool, arms resting on your knees, watching it all unfold. You should feel relaxed. Instead, you feel twitchy. It's hard to stop baking when baking is what you are. You spot your neighbor, Nenny, carrying a tray of little onion loaves. You wonder if she double kneads her dough like you do. Probably not. Like stepping out of time. You're making bread while everyone else is chasing gods, your uncle, your grandmother. The man who built the oven you now lean against, were they the same? Did they keep baking through festivals, too stubborn or too soot-stained to stop? This is the part where most folks will go join the celebration. Find a cool spot by the Nile. You set it near the warm ashes, no fire needed. Just residual heat, just enough to rise slowly. No rush, what is known. Baking was nearly always considered a domestic craft tied to the home, to women, to the rhythm of life. You hear cymbals now and maybe a flute. The boat must be near. People are shouting, some crying. The gods are meeting, after all Hathor and Horus. Their symbolic reunion celebrated with cheers and a whole lot of date wine. And yet in the temples it became sacred, male-dominated, ritualized. Watch the god barge float by, carried by priests and pulled by ropes like a divine carnival ride. The children will squeal, the elders will mumble blessings, and the young ones will try to sneak kisses in the tall reeds. But you've seen it before, dozens of times. Instead, you wander back inside and check the flour jar. Still half full. Good, someone's brought out marinated duck. You hear laughter, the squeal of sandals on wet clay, the clatter of a dropped jug. You measure out a scoop and start a small batch, not for trade, not for temple, just because. Just to keep your hands busy. There's a strange comfort in mixing flour and water while the world dances around you. A fringe belief you once heard from a Nubian trader, during festivals, bakers should not cook. You wear it like a second skin. You don't touch it yet. Let it rest. He claimed it offended the spirits who wanted the air filled with incense, not smoke. You asked him if the gods were going to eat the incense instead. He didn't laugh. You need anyway. And as your hands work the dough, you think about the bakers who came before you. Historians still question how the baking trade passed through generations. Was it family-based? Guild-organized? Apprenticeship-driven? The records are thin, the tomb art vague. You've lived between those two worlds, baking for daily life. Baking for eternity. The dough is ready. You shape it into one simple loaf. Nothing ornate, no duck gods, just a perfect oval. Outside, the chanting swells. You smile. Partly because you know half the village will regret the date wine later. The smell of roasting fish drifts in from the courtyard. You press your hand gently against the side of the oven, still warm. That's how you measure time now, not in hours, but in heat. The sun's started to drop. The golden light stretches across the floor, landing just right on the cooling loaf. You wipe your hands and sit again. The same stool. The same back curve, the same hum of people, but tonight feels different. Because you didn't bake for the temple. You didn't bake for the market. You didn't even bake for your neighbors. You baked for the quiet, for the pause. You close your eyes and breathe deep. The scent of flour, of smoke, of that faint sour tinge of fermentation, it's all still there. And you think, this is the part no one sees, not the rituals, not the monuments. Not the golden gods, just this, a baker in the quiet. At the edge of a festival, making bread not because it's needed, but because it feels right. The festival winds down the way all Egyptian festivals do, not with a grand finale, but with a slow, dusty exhale. The priests have carried their gods back inside. The drums have thudded their last cheerful thump. Even the children are quieter now, slumped on their mothers' backs or sprawled in the shade, sticky with syrup and sleep. You sit by your oven, chewing on a crust from the festival batch. It's stale now, but still good. There's something deeply satisfying about a crust gone chewy from the night air, especially when you baked it yourself, which of course you did. Across the way, someone starts sweeping. You recognize the rhythm, swish, pause, swish, swish. Probably Hinnet clearing petals from her doorstep. You're tired, sure, but also awake, alert in a way only bakers understand. The fire may be out, but your bones are still baking. Then the flour bench caked with bits of dough, sticky and dried. You use a palm-woven brush, one of your own design. There's a chipped bowl of water for the toughest spots and a bit of linen to mop it dry. Do people bake at home? Did they rely on local specialists like you? Or did the gods get first dibs on the best flour? These are your tools, not sacred, not expensive, but yours. One house down, a goat bleats mournfully left out of the feast, no doubt. You should sleep now. But your body doesn't quite agree. The rest of the village is quiet, spent, satisfied. You thought she meant taste. But now you think she meant something else. That may be the work itself, this endless loop of grind, knead, bake, feed leaves behind a trace, a warmth, a shadow of care. You could sleep now, they look like bones or instruments. Or both, right in the corner where the wall meets the oven curve. And you just lean. After years of tending the oven, your rest cycles are out of sync with the rest of the world. And there were people like you local bakers who filled in the gaps, who fed the festivals, the funerals, the weddings, who knew how to keep the fire hot without ruining the roof. And somewhere in the dark, a cicada begins its quiet little song. Who could stretch a single handful of emmer wheat into 6 tiny loaves with a whisper of fennel and a prayer? So instead, you begin cleaning. You start with the ash pit, scraping gently so as not to disturb the layer of coals you're saving for tomorrow. And while you clean, you think about the oven, about the loaves, about the people, enough time. Enough love in the hands, even when your arms are tired and your patience is thin. There is a scholarly debate that's been tossed around for decades now, whether Egyptian baking was primarily domestic, communal, or temple-centered. Truth is, all of that is true. There were state bakeries that fed whole workforces. There were family hearths that produced rough barley flatbreads. But none of that makes it into the official stories. Pharaohs get the inscriptions. Priests get the scrolls. Soldiers get the songs. You get calices. Still, the bread remembers. That's something your grandmother used to say. The bread remembers who made it. You finish cleaning the tools and line them up along the wall. You check your jar of starter, it's sleepy now, but still bubbling faintly. A good sign? And then you do something you haven't done in weeks. You sit at the back of the bakery. The bricks are cool. The air smells like flour dust and old smoke. You don't think about grain taxes, or market demands, or whether your next batch will rise. You think about that first time you baked alone. How you stayed up all night, terrified the bread would burn, convinced you'd ruin the offering. And how in the end it came out just fine, not perfect. But enough, that's what baking is, really. Not art, not science. Just enough warmth. You close your eyes. You hear the oven settling a low creak like old wood, even though it's stone. And you think, not for the first time, maybe this is what eternity feels like. Not golden fields or feather-weighing judgments. Just you, your oven, and the knowledge that someone somewhere will eat what you made. And be full. The next morning doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like a continuation of heat, of hunger, of habit. You wake before the sky has even finished turning blue. It calls you like always. And like always you answer. Your back stages a minor rebellion. But your hands? They're ready. Just enough for yourself and a neighbor or two. You hum while you work something quiet, wordless. Scraps of linen and broken flower garlands litter the streets. The perfume of yesterday's incense clings to the air like a ghost that doesn't know it is supposed to leave. Each movement is part stretch, part massage, part conversation. You've come to think of dough as a kind of animal. Not quite alive, but close. It responds to your mood. Today, you're calm. And so is it. A few handfuls of dried reed, a twist of dung, a whisper of yesterday's embers coaxed back to life. It's an art, knowing when to add more and when to wait. You teach someone if anyone ever asked. People will be slow to rise, hungover, some of them. Sunburnt, but they'll be back. Hungry again. A tune that probably doesn't even exist, but has followed you through every early morning since you were old enough to stir dough. They know what to do before your thoughts can even catch up. They reach for the water jug, the flour scoop, the mixing bowl worn as smooth as river stones. You sit with your arms folded, watching the crust form. It's a quiet transformation, a miracle that doesn't announce itself. Flour, water, and fire ancient, simple, sacred. The kind that fills a stomach without needing to be admired. But she married a fisherman and moved downriver. Said the smoke made her cough. You can't blame her, perfect. Traces of herbs have been found in some samples, but it's unclear whether that was intentional or just poor grain hygiene. Some say people added spices for flavor, not prayers. Not epic poems, recipes. He said the idea was that Pharaoh would never go hungry in the afterlife. You don't know if it's true, but it comforts you. Others say they did it to mask the taste of age. You're not sure. You just know a pinch of cumin can work wonders when the grain's gone sour. The world is still holding its breath. Even the dogs haven't started barking yet. But the oven has. You can smell it before you even open your eyes. The faint mineral tang of ash, the echo of yesterday's loaves, the promise of warmth. Your joints complain as you stand. Knees crackle like dried twigs. This batch is small, a personal one. Outside, the world is still recovering from the festival, and you'll be ready. Today's dough feels light, springy. You knead with care. Folding the flour in on itself, pressing out the night's stiffness. You roll out 4 loaves, nothing fancy, no duck molds or sacred shapes. Just round on a spread. Historians still argue whether everyday Egyptian bread was seasoned or plain. You stoke the oven with quiet reverence. But no one asks, not really. Baking, it turns out, is something people enjoy eating, not learning. Still, you wonder sometimes who will carry this fire after you. A rooster who sounds deeply confused about what time it is. You had a niece once, she was good with dough. Quick fingers, a strong sense of weight and timing. You pull your stool close and wait as the first loaf goes in. The oven sighs around it. Fringe thought, you once heard from a traveling stonemason that Pharaoh's tomb had walls painted with bread recipes. Because maybe the gods aren't looking for glory. Maybe they just want a warm loaf and someone to share it with. You pull the first loaf out, steam lifts in gentle ribbons. The crust crackles as it cools. You press it lightly with your thumb, and then you do something rare. You eat it right then and there, still warm, no butter, no honey, no lentils on the side. Just bread. You chew slowly, eyes closed, letting the flavors settle into your tongue like stories being told by an old friend. This is why you bake, not for money, not for status, but for this. For that first bite when the world disappears and all that exists is warmth, texture, and the simple joy of making something with your own hands. You lean back against the oven, the heat curling gently around your shoulders. Outside, the village is waking. You hear sandals in the dirt, a mother calling a child. You don't need to see it to know what comes next. More mouths to feed. More dough to knead, more loaves to bake, and you'll be here, like always. Because in Egypt, before the scribes, before the chariots, before the gods carved in gold, there was fire, there was flour, and there was you. The fire has dimmed now. The last loaf has cooled, and the air is no longer thick with smoke, but soft with the scent of baked grain and old stone. The oven rests like you do, silent, still but not quite empty. Just the low rustle of palm fronds swaying, the faint lap of the Nile in the distance, and the occasional creak of reed roofs settling into sleep. You can feel its warmth in your bones, in the soles of your feet, in the slow breath you take as the night folds around you. Outside, the wind carries a hush. No voices now, no footsteps. You sit there, eyes half closed, in the dim glow of an oil lamp. The sound of dough when it's ready. The smell of flour that's gone just slightly off. The subtle tilt of a fire that's too hot on one side. Your hands are quiet now, resting palm up on your knees, dusted faintly with flour that didn't quite wash off. You don't bother with the blanket your skin has grown used to the heat, and the stillness wraps around you like linen anyway. You think about how many loaves you've made, not the number, no one counts that, but the feeling, the rhythm, the way your hands remember what your mind forgets. And tomorrow it will begin again, but not yet, not now. For now, you rest in the quiet glow of a life lived through warmth and labor, through ash and water, through flame and breath. Let your thoughts drift like smoke into the rafters. Let the sounds around you fade. You are safe. You are home. And the oven is sleeping too.